narrative is a journey. It takes us places. I think all stories adhere to that idea on many levels. There's nothing groundbreaking about what I'm saying. A lot of writers have echoed it, including the writer in question today, Eudora Welty, in the book in question today, One Writer's Beginnings. But before I get to that book, or that memoir, I want to talk about perhaps her most famous short story. She's perhaps best known as a short story writer. And A Worn Path is perhaps the most celebrated of them. It's about Old Phoenix, an old Southern black woman. I don't want to ruin the story for you, but she's on this journey, and it's about all of the trials and obstacles that she encounters along the way, to such an extent that near the end of the journey, she forgets why she's on it for a moment. In addition to adhering to this idea that narrative is a journey and that it takes us places, it also is, or adheres to, another idea of Eudora Welty's that I heard in an interview, where she says that her main job as a writer is to be attentive to life. A lot of people love the story because it's sort of filled with symbols. And it is, if you prefer to read it that way. But that's not why I like it. I like it because of how it pulls me along and directs my attention to all of the fascinating and sometimes dreamy details. She definitely tapped into something when she wrote it. It's immersive, it's rich, and it adheres to those two ideas. Number one, that narrative is a journey, that it takes us places, and also that the writer's job is to be attentive to life and to somehow give that gift temporarily to the reader, so that while we're reading her story, life seems larger than life. Okay? It seems more illuminating than it actually is, or as illuminating as it should be if we had the vision that we should have. It was first published in 1940 in the Atlantic Monthly, and then it was included in her collection A Curtain of Green a year later in 1941. Eudora Welty was born in 1909 and she lived until 2001, 92 years. Her breakout story was something called The Death of a Traveling Salesman. It came out in 1936 in a now defunct literary magazine called Manuscript. She's also quite well known for a short story called Where is the Voice Coming From?, which was published in the New Yorker in 1963. In that same year, the black activist Medgar Evers was shot and killed in Mississippi. Eudora Welty, who'd spent almost all of her life in Jackson, Mississippi, felt as though she knew the type of person who would kill a guy like Medgar Evers. And she wrote the story, in her words, out of outrage, embodying who she imagined the assassin to be. She, I think, won the O. Henry Award at least twice, maybe more. I know she was the runner-up for A Worn Path. In the early 40s, I think 1942, she won it for a short story called The Wide Net. In 1979, the talk show host Dick Cavett had Eudora Welty on for 2 consecutive episodes of his talk show. It was on New York City Public Television, WNET. I'll put the link to the 2 episodes below in the description of this video. Anyway, in minute 11 of that first video, she reads the beginning of The Wide Net. It is hypnotizing. The way she does the voices of these 2 guys, the story is basically about a guy who goes out on a drunken bender and the next morning wakes up to this note from his wife who says that she's taken her life, she's drowned herself in the river, and he recruits a neighbor, a friend, to go drag the river with. The way she does these 2 guys, the way she does their voices, right, without changing her own, impressive. Really, you gotta see it. It's indispensable, really. In 1969, she published a novella in the New Yorker called The Optimist's Daughter. It's about this widowed woman who goes to take care of her father in his final days, and he then dies, and she has to deal with her stepmom and, you know, a bunch of family history. She then expanded it. It came out as a novel in 1972, and she won the Pulitzer Prize with it. The book in question today, One Writer's Beginnings, was originally part of the Massey Lectures, the first annual Massey Lectures at Harvard University, about the history of American civilization. She then converted those lectures into a book, a memoir, called One Writer's Beginnings. And if you can imagine, it was on the New York Times bestseller list for 46 weeks, almost a year. You can definitely see why. Because it's kind of like a book of detailed nostalgia about long gone times, a long gone era, you know, of schoolrooms, of maybe the coziness of Southern Christian faith, about car trips, about train trips, about two people, her parents who were deeply and maybe even eccentrically in love. I would say that the book is about, in general, where and how she was raised. Like I said, in Jackson, Mississippi, and who she was raised by. Her insurance executive father, originally from rural Ohio, and her mother, who was a former school teacher from West Virginia and a Charles Dickens fanatic. She writes about how these experiences contributed to her becoming a writer. In the first two sections of the book, it's not very clear. You have to kind of tease out that theme, but at the end of the second section, it's a very short book. At the end of the second section, and all through the third, she's more forthcoming about this. Another thing about this book is that because Eudora Welty was such a masterful short story writer, she's able to convey tremendous depth of character with a single line of dialogue. And that's especially true in this book when she's writing about her mother. Anyway, from this point on in the video, I'm going to read to you certain lines that stood out to me, certain lines from this book that stood out to me, and how they're related. I'm going to speak about how I think they're related to this idea of narrative being a journey. Okay? Again, there are scenes in this book where she talks about these car trips she would take, or these train trips she would take. Because she lived in Jackson, Mississippi, which was neither her mother's home or her father's childhood home, she would, during the summers, the entire family would go to visit both of these families, okay? She writes, saying, "The trips were wholes unto themselves. They were stories, not only in form, but in their taking on direction, movement, development, and change." Okay? Then she says something fascinating at the end of the page. She says, "Time as we know it subjectively, is often the chronology that stories in novels follow. It is the continuous thread of revelation." The continuous thread of revelation. We'll come back to that, okay? But she then goes on to say, right? Through travel, through these trips, right? I first became aware of the outside world, right? Coming back to the idea of having to be attentive to life. She writes, "The outside world is the vital component of my inner life. My work, in the terms in which I see it, is as dearly matched to the world as its secret sharer." So I guess she's the secret sharer, right? She is the writer, right? Conveying this outer world, which has become her inner world. And that's what she's conveying in her stories, and in her memoir in this case. Okay? Another great quote, right? So later on, during the Great Depression, when she gets her first job, right, she works for something called the Works Progress Administration, okay, as a junior publicity agent, okay? And she has to travel all around Mississippi, writing news stories for country papers and taking pictures, photographs. She writes, this is what she realized from that job. Life doesn't hold still. A good snapshot stopped a moment from running away. She learned that she had to be ready to click the shutter at the crucial moment. Okay? She learned, this is a great line, how every feeling waits upon its gesture, and how she had to be prepared to recognize this moment. And this is the key thing. She realized in the end that she felt the need to hold transient life in words. I was moved reading this because as I'm reading this, I was getting ready. I was in the final stages of preparing my memoir for publication, My Half Orange, A Story of Love in Language in Seville, which is about a journey, right? It's about my journey from New York City to Seville, Spain. Okay? And that journey is a narrative. And I have to be attentive to details. Okay? And how do I structure that novel? How do I structure that memoir in a kind of novelistic form? Okay? The only way to do it, right, is to go back to that line where she says, structure it according to the continuous thread of revelation, which is, right, the chronology that stories and novels follow. All right? When I go back and I think about the moments, right, that how time kind of condensed and expanded according to the revelations that I had about what it is to be me, what it is to assimilate in a foreign land, what is Seville, what is New York, okay? What it is to be suddenly accommodating to this new way of living, to this new language, and at the same time accommodating myself and assimilating to what it is to be a father and what it is to be a husband. All of those things. I'm stringing it together, or I strung it together by revelations. That's exactly how I strung it together. So this really, really moved me, and it really, really struck a chord because of the difficulties that I found in composing something that occurred over almost a decade. How do I structure that book? Well, according to revelations. That's the only way to do it. Okay? Okay, I'm going to finish up with a few more quotes. At one point, she quotes the writer Elizabeth Bowen, saying, physical detail cannot be invented. And then Eudora Welty adds, it can only be chosen. That's tremendously illuminating for us writers, especially writers of memoir. All right? It's about choosing the most revelatory moments and then ordering them according to that continuous thread of revelation. Then check this line out. She writes, what discoveries I've made in the course of writing stories all begin with the particular, never the general. Then, keeping that line in mind, the first line of the story, okay? In our house on North Congress Street in Jackson, Mississippi, where I was born, the oldest of 3 children, in 1909, we grew up to the striking of clocks. It begins with the particular, right? The most basic birth details. And then, is there anything more connotatively emphatic about the violence of passing time, about how time forges us, than the striking of clocks? Okay? I mean, only the greats can do this. Only the greats can do this. All right? Now, in case I haven't recommended this book enough, okay? Let me read one more line to finish up. Okay? She's talking about her love of books, her love of stories when she was young. She writes, "It had been startling and disappointing to me to find out that storybooks had been written by people, that books were not natural wonders coming up of themselves like grass." Well, this book is a natural wonder. And it came up out of her like grass, completely naturally. It's reminded me why I wanted to be a writer, why I still want to be a writer. And even if you don't want to be a writer, you know, let Eudora Welty take you back to her childhood. And if you don't want to go to the memoir, check out the stories I mentioned. They're all little masterpieces, all of them.